Hello. Can you all hear me? Good. Great. So we are recording for those who can't attend, and I know that there are a few more that are signed up who will be attending. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes before I get started. I plan to talk for probably about 15 or 20 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions and share some best practice within your own school. Okay, so I'm just getting the hang of sharing my screen. Hopefully you can all see this. I haven't presented on Zoom before. I've been involved in quite a lot of Zooms, but this is the first time presenting, so I'm sorry if there's a bit of teething trouble. Toggling back and forth will be a bit of a challenge. Okay. All right, so I've just got a few tabs open. I'll be going back and forth, but hopefully mostly on this tab. So I'll start here and I'll present it full screen in a moment. My name is Angela Johnson. I am head of English at an IB World School in London. I have been involved with lots of different aspects of the MYP over the past 11 years now. I was personal project coordinator for 4 years. And I've been an interdisciplinary assessment author, scrutineer, and examiner for a few years. So what I have to share is sort of informed by that experience, but also the role that I've played within our school as a curriculum leader. So I am very, very new to most social media, but I do have a blog that I've linked to here, and I'm on Twitter. So I'll be posting all of this on there, and I'll also pop it into our Zoom Meet sheet, or whatever you want to call it, Google Doc. If you would like to take some time to introduce yourself either in this document or in the chat, that'd be great, and say where you're from. And any burning questions you can pop in here, and I'll come back to this document at the end of the presentation so that I can hopefully answer your questions. And then I'll link to notes from the meeting here so you can look at it after the fact. I'm trying to just see what else did I want to share. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. I think I've opened my document twice.
Angela, how do we get to your, how do we get to this document?
I think you actually have to ask for permission. I tried to open it up, but I wasn't sure how to do that, to be honest. So if you ask for permission, then I'll grant you permission. For now, if you don't have the permission, it might be best just to introduce yourself in the chat.
Okay.
So let me go back here. So yeah, if you could just introduce yourself in the chat and remain muted unless you have a question. I'm happy to take questions at any point during the presentation. If you do have something to say, if no one's speaking, I'm not going to be, too fussed about rules. Speak out, or there is a raise your hand function. So hopefully that will all work smoothly. Okay. So the focus really is less to do with individual IDU unit planning in terms of the nuts and bolts of what goes in a unit, and more how can we develop a framework for whole school IDUs and what possibilities exist for a common inquiry. One of the things that I've found in my experience is that the most successful students come from schools where interdisciplinary learning is really part of the culture of the school. It's not seen as a bolt-on. For whatever reason, IDU, I think those letters for a lot of people conjure up a kind of fear that this is something extra that they have to do, or it's going to take time that they don't have. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll see that it is possible to implement an IDU without a huge amount of time taken away from the disciplines. Also, how can we effectively structure interdisciplinary learning in a remote or a classroom environment? So what I'm proposing here, the ideas that I have, could be implemented in the real life classroom once we're back in a normal situation. And how can we promote intellectual curiosity and really kind of encourage student voice and choice? And what tools or techniques can be used to support the objectives and the criteria? So that's what I'm looking at. It's quite a lot today. So let me go forward. I thought it would be useful to just review the principles of interdisciplinary experiences, and I'm going to come back to that word experiences, which I think is quite important. All of this comes from Fostering Interdisciplinary Teaching and Learning in the MYP, so the IDU guide. Most of it will probably not be new to you if you're a seasoned MYP teacher, but I highlighted the bits at the end, which I thought were important. Create a product to communicate interdisciplinary understandings. And to me, this very much aligns with the personal project and the community project. So there are a lot of principles of interdisciplinary learning that are compatible with the personal project. And in fact, the personal project itself is maybe the ultimate interdisciplinary experience for students. And also reflect on the significance of their work and evaluate limitations and possibilities of integrating those disciplines in ways that develop new understanding. And I've highlighted those just because I thought that it was important to remind ourselves of that as we're developing these experiences for students. There we go. So the next bit is just some ideas that I've put together over the past few weeks for how we could set up a common framework within school. I think that, again, it's important that we prioritize interdisciplinary learning, and the best way to do that is to really put it at the heart of the curriculum. And that's not to discourage those spontaneous units that might come up throughout the year. Certainly there's room for creativity and innovation, but if we have a common framework where all students in MYP 1 through 5 are all engaged in an inquiry at the same time in a similar sort of way, I think that we'll get a lot more out of the experience, and I think logistically it will be a lot smoother for schools. So just to review, some of you already know this anyway, but there are 3 main ways to enter an IDU. One of them is via the key concept. So you might integrate 2 disciplines that are in many ways, very different. So for example, what comes to mind, my specialty is English. English and math seem to me very, very far apart, but they might come together through a key concept. You might also enter an IDU through the global context. So you might think, okay, let's look at this topic through the lens of globalization and sustainability. And you might then think, okay, well, what disciplines would best support that global context, and go from there. Or you might enter through the content itself or topic, which is what I'm actually going to be focusing on in the next slides. That's the basis for the framework that I've set up, but you can adapt it to any of these entry points. There is a 4th entry point, which is the disciplines themselves. In my experience, I've found that entering at the disciplines almost encourages that bolt-on effect, if you can call it that. It's almost encouraging teachers to try to kind of shoehorn an IDU into what's already there in the curriculum. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We all have content that we want to teach, but it can stifle the conceptual focus. So that it's up to schools how they decide to enter, and different departments and different teachers how they enter an IDU. But we want to make sure that we're not losing that conceptual focus. So I am going to be focusing on the entry point through the content or the topic, and I'll come back to that. But just to, again, this is the most text-heavy slide, I promise, but I thought it was quite important to look at this from, again, the teacher support material for fostering interdisciplinary learning, teaching and learning, which is that not all topics are equally suited for quality interdisciplinary integration or inquiry. Sorry if my screen was covered. Some topics, however, defy single disciplinary treatment. Multifaceted topics invite students to integrate two or more bodies of knowledge. The world is full of these multifaceted topics, and these are rich opportunities for formal and informal interdisciplinary inquiry. The IB has launched a series of resources called Global Engagement, Teaching and Learning, blah, blah, blah. I won't read the rest. But I've pulled out phrases that jumped out at me, which is global. We see global repeated 3 times. And there's more of an emphasis now in the DP on global issues, particularly in the new diploma English course, but also I know that global issues feature in economics, perhaps in the world studies extended essay, to a certain extent in TOK. So I thought this was interesting, and it got me thinking, perhaps the UN Sustainable Development Goals would provide an interesting entry point from a content perspective. So it's worth looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and thinking, how could we use those as entry points? How could we adapt content that revolves around those Sustainable Development Goals? And I think that we get quite a lot of student engagement out of that. So I am going to run through a few possibilities for how this could work in terms of logistics, framework. So the first possibility is perhaps the easiest. So each grade level, MYP 1 to 5, at the same time, focuses on the same key concept, global context, and integration of disciplines. It would be a big IDU, but each year group could focus on the same inquiry. And I've linked to some example statements of inquiry that I've created, which I'm not necessarily saying are the best, but you know, it's a starting point, and I will share those in the document. And I'll also pop them up on the screen now. Oops. So again, bear with me. Hopefully you can see my screen still. So this is on my blog, and it will be in the document that you all have access to. So I've just put together some statements of inquiry, and I chose the topic or the content of COVID-19. And the reason for that is it's a shared experience. We're all going through it globally, and it might be interesting to look at from an interdisciplinary perspective. However, I'm very well aware of the fact that it's a very sensitive topic, and it's not necessarily something that all students or all schools feel comfortable approaching at this stage. So it could easily be substituted with a topic like climate change, for example. But this is just a starting point, and I think the statements of inquiry are general enough to be able to suit any global issue. So if I go back here, that is one way of structuring it. The second possibility is that each grade level focuses on the same global context, the same integration of disciplines, but each grade level focuses on a different conceptual lens. So that requires a little bit more planning on the part of teachers, but it's just about changing that conceptual lens. So that's another possibility. And I've just put some examples here. They're not prescriptive. The third possibility is that each grade level focuses on the same key concept, the same integration of disciplines, but a different global context. So we're changing that contextual lens here, which again, a little bit of tweaking with the unit plans, but could be a possibility. The fourth possibility is that students all focus on the same key concept, they all focus on the same global context, but the integration of disciplines is different. And this might be the most complex scenario, and would require quite a lot of forward planning from different departments, but it is a possibility that could work. The fifth possibility is that instead of arranging the IDUs by grade level, students could be placed in vertical groupings. So you could have students in MYP 1 working with students in MYP 3 and 5 and so forth. And the assessment could be the same for everyone in the group, but individual students would be assessed according to their relevant MYP 1, 3, and 5 criteria, which is already scaffolded. So that is a possibility. But again, that could be trickier depending on the size of your school. So I throw it out there as a possibility. We have not done it before, but it is something that smaller schools could think about doing, or you could work with. And then the final possibility is you could give students a choice of key concepts or global contexts or disciplines to inquire into, and groups could be built around this. So you could, if I go back, you could give them a set of key concepts to choose from, and then that would determine which.
Hello,
sorry?
There's someone's in the waiting room.
Oh, I will go and admit them. Thank you. Okay. So you could give them that choice and they could choose, but again, that would require a little bit of planning, and you'd have to have a few units set up as possibilities in case students did make that choice. So that brings me to how to structure learning. So I kind of base this on the inquiry cycle, and I'll go back to that previous slide in a moment, but looking at inquiry, action, and reflection. And if we look at day 1, this would require a collapsed timetable to be the most effective. Day 1 would be more teacher-led, where the objectives are outlined, students would be provided with disciplinary grounding. Day 2 would be more student self-directed or collaborative, and this would be synthesis. And then day 3 could be presentations or mini exhibitions. It would be the opportunity for students to communicate their interdisciplinary understandings. And there could be opportunities for reflection, but that could be something that students do on their own. So it could be kind of a 4th day, but not a timetabled 4th day. It could be students have that to do as homework. So again, I've just really designed it around the inquiry cycle. I have heard of schools doing IDU. We've done an IDU in a day before. I've heard of schools doing an IDU in a week. Of course, there is no minimum or maximum that is prescribed by the IB. So, you know, some IDUs last 4 weeks, but obviously that takes time away from the single subject. So by structuring it in this way, yes, you would have to take students off timetable, but they would be engaged in a unit all at the same time. You would meet that requirement, but also it would be something exciting if the whole school was involved in a common inquiry. So just some ideas, some things that I've put together, and I'm sure that people have many, many more than I do. Some ideas for in a remote environment or even in the real classroom, how you could use technology or different tools for promoting the different criteria or the different stages. So for disciplinary grounding, this could be synchronous lectures or discussions, screencasts, TED Talks, Nearpod, Kahoot, Parlay Ideas, which I tried out for the first time earlier this week, which was great. But just a few ideas for how to promote that remotely. For synthesis, students, of course, have many, many tools at their disposal. They've got Google Drive, they've got Padlet, something else I'm new to, Trello, Scribbler, Concept Board, and actually a lot of these tools or apps that students might use could be used for teachers to collaborate. And I've just actually started a Padlet for curriculum review and reflection within my department. So, you know, in this particular remote environment, planning an IDU is a little bit different than when you're in the staff room together. So these tools could be used. For communicating and reflecting, again, you've got Google Slides, Prezi, Mentimeter, various different ways that students could communicate their disciplinary understandings. They could create podcasts, they create an iMovie, lots of choice there for communicating and reflecting. Let me go forward. And in terms of ATLs, I think it's kind of implicit that transfer features in every ATL. But in this environment, in the remote environment, we could really be promoting students using a variety of digital environments and media. So looking at that exchanging of thoughts, messages, and information through interaction, obviously different than in a classroom setting. The last couple of slides are more about assessment and just reminders, things that I picked up more as I was writing interdisciplinary e-assessments, kind of buried, and I'll move this, within the criteria for reflecting in year 5 is reference to ways of knowing. So criterion D, MYP 5 only, for students to hit the top levels, this is from level 7-8, they have to evaluate the benefits and limitations of disciplinary and interdisciplinary knowledge and ways of knowing in specific situations. So that's very easy to overlook. It does need to be explicitly taught in year 4 and 5 of the program, kind of a mini TOK, because they are, the ways of knowing are addressed on the interdisciplinary e-assessment. So it's just more of a reminder. And I've got an example here of one that we've done. Our MYP 4s have done an IDU for the past several years now, where the IDU title is Memorializing Conflict, and they look at, they integrate INS and language and literature, and they look at how cultures or countries memorialize conflicts. And their summative assessment is, they have a choice. They can analyze a memorial, or they can create their own memorial and analyze the choices that they've made. And we've embedded within their reflection a strand where they have to explain how their group used language, either verbal or visual, to elicit an emotional response from the audience. So we've focused on the ways of knowing of language and emotion. We haven't made that explicit to the students that these are TOK ways of knowing, but we've talked about them more implicitly. And that was just an example to show you how in practice that can be done. Now, I noticed just on Monday, we're Wednesday now, just on Monday, that the IB has just released some supporting material, which does include some interdisciplinary inquiry resources. So if I escape here and show you my tab, it's here. So supporting MYP learning during the pandemic, but scrolling down, there are ready-made tasks here. So, you know, the ideas that I've presented, hopefully they give you something to think about within your school, but there are tasks that the IB has released as well with some teacher support notes. They're not full units, but they are really interesting tasks, and units can be built around them, and they are all based on previous interdisciplinary e-assessments. So they're quite interesting. So it is worth checking out. So I'm going to just go to the document and see if anyone's added any questions, and if not, I'll open it up for questions. Nothing noted, but I will open it up. Feel free to unmute, and I'm happy to take any questions or let people share ideas.
Hi.
Oh.
Hello. Thank you for your time and your slides. But I want to access the documents in the Google Drive if I can.
Okay. I think you might have to ask me for permission.
Yes, I asked you for permission.
Okay, let me see.
Notioneducation.com.
Okay. Let me just go to my email. I'll stop sharing for the moment. Because I've got some new emails at the moment, which have come through just since I've been presenting. So, there we go. Okay, yeah, I've got loads. Okay, so let me just take a moment. If anyone wants to jump in with questions or just anything that you want to share, I'll go through these and give you access.
Angela, can I ask a question?
Yes, I can multitask.
For MYP4, in my school, we've got science students who have different options. So you've got some taking physics, some taking chemistry, some taking biology. And then for INS, there are people who are taking economics and geography and history. So not all students are sharing the same subject. So how do you manage IDU between subjects where there are options and you don't have a whole group taking the same subject?
That's a good question. So I can answer based on the experience with MYP4 this year and the IDU that we did with INS. So what we did was our students take history for half the year and geography for the other half of the year. So we organized the IDU at a time when kind of between each of those subjects. So when they were kind of changing over from history to geography or vice versa. But admittedly, the IDU only did focus on history. So technically, they didn't get the geography aspect, but we are looking at changing that for next year so that we can add in geography. I think if you were to do this particular setup, you would just focus on the student. It's tricky. If it's not integrated sciences, then it might just be that they focus on the science or the INS subject that they are currently studying. But that would be tricky, and that might be something that you would have to just decide you're not going to integrate those disciplines.
Now, looking at the MYPE assessment, have you tried using that as source of IDU for any of your classes? And then how has that been implemented and how has it gone, your experience?
I've actually led training within my school on how you can do that, how you can use the pre-release material, the PRM, to work backwards and design a unit. To my knowledge, no one has actually done that yet because we had so many units already developed. But I think that can be done because the PRM includes it includes the key concept, it includes potential related concepts, it includes a statement of inquiry and inquiry questions. So it's kind of almost a ready-made unit. You just have to pop in your content. But obviously, there's a tight timeline because they don't release the PRM until I think it's the 1st of April for May sessions, and the 1st of October or the 15th of October for the November sessions. So it would definitely be tight to develop an IDU within 6 weeks, but that's if you're using the current years. You can always use previous years to work backwards, of course.
Thanks.
Okay, can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and everything, Angela. I have two questions. My first question is, like as a teacher, can we have this same summative assignment for IDU and the subject one?
Ooh, as far as I know, no. The IDU is a separate assessment because you're using separate criteria. You're using the IDU criteria. Now within the disciplinary grounding, so criterion A, you'll build in your subject-specific objectives, but you're assessing against that IDU criteria. Can you double up? I think it's not advised to do that.
Okay.
But there might be a task that you do within the within the disciplinary grounding that could be used for a discipline-specific assessment, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So now my second question is, like for example, I teach design. My unit has done last month, and science teacher or language literature teacher, and they are teaching right now. And but I have already done the concept last month, but they are doing this month, right? So can we make one IDU merging, my previous unit?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? So they've taught a unit.
Sorry, I have already taught my unit, and which is done last month, right?
Mhm.
But my colleague is doing the same concept current unit. So
Right.
can we make one IDU?
I suppose you could. You would just have a short. You just want to make sure that you review the disciplinary grounding with the students before you assess them on the interdisciplinary criteria. So
Okay, so it's not necessary. Yeah, it means it's not necessary. Like we are currently teaching. It should be current teaching, right? Units.
it should be,
It shouldn't be current teaching, or it should be. It
as
should
much
be.
as possible, it should be
Okay,
aligned.
okay.
It should be taught at the same time. And there's a difference between an interdisciplinary unit and a cross-curricular link. So you might find that you can make links, but a true interdisciplinary unit is an integration where students are they're bringing the disciplines together to inquire into a common concept and global context, and they're being assessed on their ability to synthesize that learning.
Okay. Last question. Sorry, I'm asking too much.
That's okay.
Just want to ask, how can we make our IDU interesting? So like all students should take interest and enjoy, because what now I feel like our students feel burdened and they don't want to do it IDU.
I think a lot of it comes from the teacher's level of enthusiasm. I think I said at the beginning, and I'm not sure if you heard that, but I think a lot of teachers find it a burden. They think, oh, it's just one more thing that we have to do. We don't have time for it. But if you make the IDU part of your school culture and you devote the time to it, whether it's that collapsed 3-day timetable, or you have your own setup where it's an IDU in a day, or you could do it, at the end of the term, for example. And if you give the students choice and options, then I think that will create more enthusiasm and excitement for learning. But if it is just treated as a bolt-on, just something else we have to do, and you try to fit it into your existing curriculum, then I don't think it's as successful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I am paying attention. I'm just going through all of these requests to share the document. So please carry on if you have questions.
Okay, can I ask you, Miss Angela?
Yes.
Yes. Please. In my school, we have the curriculum, and we match it. We match the scope and sequence with the CCSS. I want to ask you that if there is a subject, or maybe 2 or 3, and I can just match it with match the scope and sequence with one CCSS, one subject, would that be enough?
As in, can you just combine 2 disciplines for an IDU?
Yes, I combine 2, or I'll just make it one subject and with the theme.
You would have to have 2 subjects for a true IDU. You'd have to have 2 disciplines to combine.
2 subjects.
You can combine as many as you want. We did an IDU a few years ago where we combined the 4 core subjects, English, Maths, Sciences, and INS. That was a pretty big IDU, but it is possible. But I think for real meaningful synthesis and to keep it manageable for students, I would say less is more, but you have to have two.
Two, okay.
Yeah.
If I did that and I make it two subjects together, can just, for example, the other subjects share with us the skills, the concepts, the key concepts, and these?
Yes, yes, you would have the same. Now you would most likely have different related concepts because each discipline has its own related concepts, but you would share the key concept. And keep in mind that there are 16 key concepts within the MYP, and some of those are shared between disciplines. So that's, if you're entering at the concept level, that could be a good entry point, is to consider which disciplines already share concepts. But you can use any of the key concepts in any discipline. So even though within language and literature, for example, the key concepts are perspective, creativity, communication, and connections, I could pluck another key concept from another subject if I felt that it was a meaningful and relevant link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Almost through these requests. So other questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. My question is that what is the ideal duration for interdisciplinary unit? What is the ideal duration? What you suggest?
That's a good question. There is no minimum or maximum that the IB requires. So it really depends on what your focus is. But I would say if we're looking at the framework that I've suggested, if students are off timetable over 3 days, they're going to be getting a minimum of 12 hours, probably around about 15, depending on, I know that in the current situation, some schools have collapsed their timetables already. In a classroom situation, they might have about 5 hours a day. And I think that that's sufficient. If you're doing it over the course of, a couple of weeks, for example, within the disciplinary lesson time, when we did our MYP4 IDU a couple of months ago, they worked on it within their English and INS classes. So they probably had the equivalent amount of time, but it was spread out over 2.5 weeks. I think that any more than that, and you are really kind of treading on disciplinary ground or territory, and it does, as much as we might like to say, let's not worry about the content so much, focus on the concepts, we do have a certain amount of content to get through.
Thanks.
Okay, Angela.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Like, if you're doing interdisciplinary sciences or integrated sciences, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is, like, we do 12 weeks of bio, 12 weeks of physics, and 12 weeks of chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I have to integrate with, say, music, I do biology.
Right.
So can I do bio and music? I mean, though I'm doing integrated sciences, can I do bio and music, or should I do integrated sciences and music?
I think in that situation, you would probably have to have the students who were in physics and chemistry also doing the IDU. I think technically they all need to be able to access the same IDU, although I'm not 100% sure about that. That might be a question for the IB.
Because we are like 3 different teachers,
Yeah.
teaching physics, chemistry, and bio. So we take 12 different weeks. So we actually cannot come together. That's
Right.
another thing. Another question I have is, like, suppose I'm doing bio and the person who does music. Now, we can only collaborate a few concepts, can be
Right.
like similar. So
Right.
disciplinary grounding, when I do, it doesn't mean that I have to have every concept that has to have something musical, right? Only
No.
some is fine.
No, and you might find, like I said, you might find a concept that if you don't have a concept in common, there might be another concept that is relevant and that you could integrate.
Okay, yeah. Fine.
So you might find, for example, I'm not sure that communication is a key concept for arts off the top of my head, but you might find that communication works for both of the subjects, for example, even though it may not be one of those subjects' key concepts.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Oops. Any other questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Like, how can like as a part of my school member, like I feel like it is very difficult to collaborate with subject teacher if we are doing one IDU, right? Number one, like because of the timetable and the schedule is so hard, like hardly we getting free time to collaborate. So sometimes we are sitting in in off time, home time, or break time, something like this. But along with, it's very difficult to go or both the teacher together in the classroom to teach IDU unit or something collaboratively. So how can we manage that?
Well, you don't have to be teaching at the same time. So you could be teaching your disciplinary grounding in one lesson, and the other teacher could be teaching in another lesson, and then there are other opportunities for the students to synthesize their knowledge again, in the framework that I've suggested. They'd be off timetable anyway. And that's another benefit to having that common inquiry, is that it makes it easier for all teachers to be off timetable, or not off timetable, but not teaching their normal lessons at that time. They can have that time to collaborate and moderate. But in terms of the planning of the unit, yeah, I know that is a real challenge. I'm quite lucky in my school that we do prioritize that collaborative planning, but I know that not all schools do. And it's down to the leadership team to recognize the IDU as an essential part of the curriculum. It is a requirement, and they need to give the time that is necessary to prepare those IDUs. So I'm sorry I don't have a solution, but it's about making it part of the school culture.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I check my understanding, please?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you said that the interdisciplinary planning is much important than to moderate the session together. So I can do my part and to check my content. For example, I'm teaching math. So if I'm talking about capacity, then I have to plan with the science teacher to have it together in planning, and then in my session I can bring it and moderate it, and in her session she can do it the same, right, according to our plan together. This is correct?
Yes,
or
as long as you have planned ahead, you've collaborated on the plan. When we did our unit, for example, we taught our English part in our English lessons, and the INS teachers taught their part in their sessions. And then we gave them time within lessons. The students, they were working in groups, so we gave them time to work on their projects in their groups, and we liaised between us, the two teachers, or actually there were four of us in total. But yes, you don't have to be teaching at the same time for it to be...
but we have to plan together.
Yes, you do have to plan together.
Yes. Okay. The last request, if you can share with us the link of the IBO for the COVID-19, which is ready-made tasks, it will be great.
It's on the presentation, and what I'll do after this is pop the link to the presentation into our sheet, the Google Drive sheet. So it will all be there.
Okay, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Is it possible for
Angela.
you, like you have showed? Hello?
Sorry, I've got two people talking at once.
Okay, yeah. So, and if is it possible for you, like you have showed 5 possibilities, right? In 5th possibilities, like you have, it's what's written, like, for example, MYP 1 students, like, and they can do IDU with MYP 2 or MYP 3 also. Can you just can you describe little?
So you could do that. I mean, again, it would depend on the size of your school and how ambitious you want to be. But if you did want to group students vertically, you could have students working together. We've done that in a different, we've had an ATL day before where students have worked collaboratively across grade levels. The assessment could be the same, but you would scaffold it through the assessment criteria. So the assessment criteria, of course, is different, 1, 3, and 5. And you might want to build in some other scaffolding for the younger students. But it is possible that you could do a vertical IDU.
Okay, same assignment, but with different descriptors, right?
Yes, different descriptors.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that it makes sense. Thank you. Thank you.
Angela, I had a question.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. It's Jackie from the States. I had a question. How do you go about figuring out what subject groups are going to work together? How do you present this to the staff? Because like I'm very new, a new coordinator on my campus, and so I know that the IDUs are important, and I'm trying to game plan for when we go back to classes. How do you present this and get them organized to figure out what content they want to work with?
Well, initially, I think we look for commonalities across the scope and sequence. So we look for example, we knew within our grade 9 curriculum, for example, that we already taught poetry of the First World War, which has since changed. It's more general, it's conflict poetry. And we knew that the history students studied the causes of the war. So we thought, well, that's a natural link. We can look at conflict in a more general sense, and then this memorializing conflict evolved. And actually, initially, I helped develop that with our head of creative arts, and music was involved in that IDU as well, but it just became a little bit too complicated to have those 3 integrations. So we started by just looking at commonalities and really just brainstorming as well. We've had our MYP coordinator has had sessions where we've all gotten together in mixed faculty groups and just brainstormed concepts that we thought would be age appropriate or interesting, topics that might lend themselves to IDUs. But I think, you know, in an ideal world, and I know not everyone can do this, it's best to start from a blank slate where you're not forcing the IDU into existing content, because then you're really limiting yourself. So if you look at it, if you do enter from a kind of topical lens, not necessarily limiting yourself to the curriculum that's already been written, if that makes sense. So that's why the idea that I originally thought of with this, looking at the pandemic as a starting point, which again is, you know, maybe a little bit too emotionally raw for a lot of students, but that's an experience that we're all sharing throughout the world. So it might be that climate change is something that is interesting and that would provoke, interest from teachers, and that might lead to something. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but hopefully I've given you some ideas.
You did. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions before? I don't want us to get cut off. I'll keep this running up until 9 just in case, but I know Zoom can sometimes cut us off. Like I said, I will share all of the documents with you. So I'll put the slides into the Google Doc. At the end of the slides is the link to the IB's resources. And I've also got my blog at the beginning of the slides, so you can check out some other resources I have on there. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have later on as well.
Excuse me, Angela.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could you please share any sample of MYP2 or MYP3 ITU, please, if it is possible for you?
Yeah, I'll have to have a look and check with my MYP coordinator. I have not been involved in any MYP2 or 3 IDUs directly.
Okay.
But I can certainly have a look.
So shall I share my email address?
Yeah, if you send it to me directly through my email, that would be great.
Okay.
And I know there are some examples on the IB's teacher support material, but I'm not sure if it's for every, let me see, oops, there's some latecomers, if it's for every year. I've just had a question, sorry, I'm really behind on the chat. Yes, the recording will be available for later, yes. And yes, I will share that link. MYP form. Yeah, I will review the chat. Sorry, I'm still very new to presenting on Zoom. I usually use Google Meet. Any other questions?
Hey, hi Angela.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to know if we can have more than 2 FAs in an IDU unit. Because normally we plan 2 FAs, one for each subject discipline that we take up. So is it possible to have more than 2, or should we restrict ourselves to only 2?
More than 2, sorry?
FAs, formative assessments.
Oh, you can have as many formative assessments as you want, as far as I know. Most units, including the IDU, would have one summative assessment. And you have to, with the IDU, you have to assess on all 4 of the criteria and all of the strands. But with formative assessments, you can do as many as you want.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ideas for how to prepare MYP 5 for IDU e-assessment. That is probably too much for me to get into now, but I do have a presentation that I made within my school a couple of years ago based on this very thing. So if anyone is interested in that, send me an email and I'll share it with you directly.
Can you send me your email? Can you send us your email?
Yeah, I will put it in the chat right now.
Okay.
I'm sending you my personal email. So if you send me an email,
Yes,
then I
can.
can.
Thank you.
So hopefully everyone can see that.
And Angela, what year do you work with?
I've been at my school for 11 years now, and I've taught every level, grades 6 through 12. Currently, I am teaching grades 9 and 11, and it was 12, but they've now left, of course.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And where are you based?
I am actually in Texas,
Oh.
and I'm at a middle school, so we have years 1 through 3.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I am going to end the recording now. But again, I've put my email in there, and if anyone wants any resources or any advice, I don't claim to be an expert, but I do have quite a lot of experience with the interdisciplinary e-assessment, and I'm happy to collaborate and share. So, do get in touch.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
And I will say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.